So according to this book, Readings in Philippine History by H. de la Costa, a Jesuit, I think that's what that means. Anyways, so when the Spanish arrived, they realized that the barangay society, or the society of the pre-colonial Philippines, actually was pretty close to European society. But not the current European society at the time, but feudalism. So to them, Philippine society, well, pre-colonial Philippine society, was very similar to Europeans during the Middle Ages, when a warrior class, bounded by fealty to a warlord, lived on the labor of serfs and slaves, and gave them in exchange protection and a rough and ready sort of justice. So much was this the case that Fray Juan de Plasencia, in describing the social structure of the Tagalog barangay, fell easily and naturally into the language of Spanish feudalism. So they discovered three castes in Philippine society: the gentlemen, the commoners, and the slaves. Oh, and the chiefs. So 4 castes. So I'll go into detail in another video, but the gentlemen, or the free men, were the Mahalikas. The commoners were called Aliping Namamahay, and the slaves were called Aliping Sagigilid. Although I think maybe this is because of how the Spanish translated it, but if I remember, it's Aliping Sagigilid. Sagigilid. Yeah. In this book, I found something interesting about Datus. So the Datu is the chief of a barangay, or the leader of a barangay, and most people still know what that term is. But in a country that is full of political dynasties, it's kind of surprising that in pre-colonial Philippines, anybody could become a Datu. So here, see, most of the chiefs are such not by blood, but by ability and prowess. A man may be of lowly birth, but if he exerts himself, if by dint of hard work and shrewdness he accumulates wealth, whether it be by farming or husbandry, whether it be by trade or the practice of some craft known to them, such as that of blacksmith or silversmith or carpenter, or whether it be of robbery and oppression, and it is usually this, such a man acquires ascendancy and renown. All the more so, the more overbearing and ruthless he shows himself to be. On the strength of such beginnings, he assumes the title of Datu, and gathers round him a following of kinsmen and even of strangers who acknowledge him their chief. One of the footnotes here is that the Datu could have started as like a patriarchal head of a family, but at the point in which the Spanish arrived, one of the priests, Father Collins, suggests that by the 16th century, the rank of Datu had become pretty much a career open to talent. That's a little surprising because in our society nowadays, a lot of success is because of blood and connections, but apparently not in pre-colonial Philippines. That being said though, this part sounds familiar. Thus, whatever one conquered, one must guard, and he who was the greater robber and tyrant was the greater chief. So going back, even though anyone could become a Datu by just sheer merit, most of the time, the path to becoming a Datu is by robbery and oppression. So back to the different social castes in the pre-colonial Philippines. The first caste were the freemen, or the Mahalikas. So what did they do? Well, first, what are the benefits? They paid neither tax nor tribute to the Datu. Not paying tax. So, however, they were bound to follow him to war, bringing their own weapons and gear. The chief, for his part, gave them a feast before setting out and divided the spoils with them at the end of the campaign. So they kind of sound similar to like the samurai in feudal Japan and knights in the Middle Ages of Europe. Although there is some nuance because we're a seafaring nation. So, 2, when the Datu set out to sea, they manned the oars. So the Mahalikas were the ones who were rowing the boats. So, and if the chief had a house to build, the Mahalikas helped him, during which time he fed them. This too was the understanding when the entire barangay set a day aside to help the chief plant a rice field. So though they did seem to be sort of the warrior caste, it's not like in like knights or samurai wherein that's the only thing they did. So apparently they also, they helped in building the houses, they helped in the farming. So they were kind of like a warrior class, but they still did a lot of the other tasks in society. I wonder if it's closer to like, I don't know how Vikings are, but like when I watch Vikings, like in Netflix, they're warriors, but they also farm and fish. So I don't know, maybe it's kind of closer like to that. So the next class would be the commoners, or the Aliping Namamahay. So the Aliping Namamahay are householders. So they own their own homes who serve a lord, serve a Datu. Whether it be the Datu or someone else. So I guess they might serve a Mahalika. So they give up half the yield of their farm, this being what had been agreed upon in the beginning. And they row for him when he has a mind to set out to sea. So yeah, so they seem to be like the serfs. They're farmers who give up a big part of their produce for the protection of the warrior caste and the chief. Well, I mean, that's how it is in feudal Europe, at least. They own their own houses, they own their own goods, and their gold is their private property, which their children inherit. And they have the free disposal of their chattels and their lands. So maybe that's where it's a little different, because, well, someone can correct me, but as far as I know, in like feudal medieval Europe, the serfs, the peasants, they did not own the land. They were just there to work it and get a portion of the crops for their work. But it's the lord who owns the lands. But it seems that's where it's different here in pre-colonial Philippines, because the quote-unquote the peasants, they actually owned their lands. Moreover, this estate is permanent and hereditary, and hence neither they nor their children can be made slaves, nor can their lords sell them. So yeah, they're not property, unlike in feudal Europe. Are they property? So, but the land is theirs. So even apparently according to this, their land cannot be sold by their lord, which is not the case from what I know about medieval Europe, wherein the lord, when the lord like sells land in medieval Europe, thus the peasants, they go to the person who also bought the land. So does this mean that pre-colonial Philippines was at least a little bit more progressive than feudal Europe? I don't know. What do you think? The lowest class in pre-colonial Philippine society were the slaves, or the Aliping Sagigilid. So the slaves, they serve their lord in the house and in the farm, and they can be sold. So unlike the Aliping Namamahay, the Aliping sa Sagigilid were more like property. The Lord allows them some share of the harvest, what He wills. This He does to make them work better. So it's not really out of generosity or anything. It's actually just to make them work more. So how do people end up to become slaves? Well, it seems that slaves are the children of people who were already slaves, but also people who were captured in war. The other way a person could become a slave is by what they would call debt slavery, which according to the Spanish was surprising to them because Europeans did not practice this practice of debt slavery. So debt slavery is when you would borrow I think most of the time, or at least according to this book, it's usually rice, where you would borrow rice. And then because of the interest that accumulates because of the borrowing, you're not able to pay it off. So you and your family become slaves in order to pay off the interest and the loan. So it was the most common cause of slavery in pre-colonial Philippines. And I'll probably do another video on that later on. Going back to the Aliping Sagigilid, or the slaves in Philippine pre-colonial culture, how did someone end up becoming a slave? Well, one way would be to be captured in a raid or at war. But the most common cause of slavery was the desire for gain and the practice of usury, or what they called debt slavery. So debt slavery is what happens when you take a loan, and because of the interest rates are so high, you're not able to pay back the interest, and so you become a slave to the debtor. It was so extreme that even in cases of extreme need, a father did not lend to a son to his father, a brother to a brother, and much less a kinsman to a kinsman, save on condition that repayment would be double the loan. So yes, so the interest was really big. You have to pay at least double the loan every year. If you're not able to pay the loan, then you become a slave along with all your children and your descendants. So why was the loan interest rate that bad? Double a year is very extreme. So the theory is that it started because people would lend rice and not money to each other. And rice, unlike money, is something that can be planted, and when it is planted, it will yield to more rice. So basically, when you borrow rice, you are competing with nature. If someone just kept the rice and planted it, they'd get more rice. So if you're borrowing that, you have to at least beat nature to make it worth the debtor. Not only that, but with each year, you double the interest more and more. So if it is not repaid in the first year of sowing, double the amount of the loan must be paid in the second year and 4 times the third, and so on at this rate. And so, because of this practice, a lot of people ended up becoming slaves due to their debts. For more videos on pre-colonial and indigenous Philippine culture, folklore, and mythology, subscribe to my YouTube channel and look for me on TikTok.